Thank you for watching. Subscribe on Betrayed Man's Diary for more stories. I'm 34, and I always thought I had the kind of life other people envied. Not flashy, not dramatic, just solid. I married my college sweetheart, Madison. We met in a philosophy seminar, where she argued that meaning only exists in moments. I thought that was poetic. She thought I was annoyingly optimistic. We balanced each other. I believed in building a life together. She believed in feeling her way through it. We dated for 2 years, moved in together at year 3, and got married at year 6. I was steady, a tech guy, never late for a bill, the kind of guy who alphabetizes spice racks. She was more spontaneous, last-minute weekend trips, deep dives into creative hobbies like painting and yoga. It worked. It really worked, for a long time. When she told me she was pregnant, I was overwhelmed in the best way. I remember the moment clearly. She was standing in the hallway, holding the test in one hand and a glass of water in the other, trying not to cry. "James," she said, "I think this is real." I hugged her so hard I nearly knocked the glass out of her hand. I kissed her forehead and told her everything was going to be amazing. We called our parents. We cried. We started sketching out names. Every night I read a page from the First Time Dad book I picked up from the bookstore. I couldn't wait. I threw myself into preparing. I painted the nursery pale yellow. I assembled a crib by hand. I bought little baby shoes she said were way too early, but I didn't care. They were so tiny, like hope you could hold. The first few weeks of pregnancy were rough for her: morning sickness, exhaustion, random food cravings. I did whatever she needed. If she wanted chili cheese fries at 10:45 p.m., I drove. If she needed silence, I tiptoed. If she cried without explanation, I just held her. But slowly, like a fog creeping in overnight, something shifted. She started acting distant. Conversations felt like I was walking on eggshells. If I asked how she was feeling, she'd snap, "Why are you always hovering?" If I didn't ask, she'd mutter, "Guess you don't care how this feels." I chalked it up to hormones, to stress. I told myself pregnancy is a battlefield for the body and mind, and I just needed to be patient. I tried harder, left sticky notes on the mirror telling her she was beautiful, made her playlists to help her relax, even signed us up for a birthing class she didn't attend. And when she started staying late at work, I didn't argue. She said there was a new project, that her manager needed her to step up. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? I think that's the part that hurts the most in hindsight, not the betrayal itself, but how hard I worked to justify it before I even knew it existed. I was blind, and worse, I wanted to stay blind. Because every time I doubted something, I'd feel Lila kick from inside her belly. And it was like life saying, "Focus on this. This is what matters." So I did. Lila was born on a cold, bright Thursday morning in early March. She came early, 3 weeks before her due date. I was terrified when Madison's water broke in the middle of the night. The drive to the hospital felt like it happened inside a tunnel. Everything outside our car was blurry and far away. But when I held her, when I looked into Lila's face for the first time, everything made sense. The world clicked. Madison was tired, but glowing. For a few days, it felt like we had made it. We were home, the 3 of us. I barely slept, not because of the crying, but because I couldn't stop watching Lila breathe. I'd sit beside her bassinet in the dim light, heart in my throat, just amazed that she was real. A week passed. We were still adjusting. The house looked like it had exploded. Diapers everywhere, laundry spilling out of every basket, cold coffee mugs on every surface. But there was this strange rhythm to it. I was tired, but happy. Then it happened. We were organizing drawers in the living room because Madison said she needed space for pumping supplies. I found her old iPhone in the back of a drawer. The screen was shattered, the battery casing a little warped, but I figured I could fix it. Maybe recover old photos, videos, memories for Lila to look at one day. I replaced the battery, connected it to my laptop, and booted it up. The messages started pouring in. Notifications from apps she hadn't deleted, mostly muted. One stood out, a thread from Travis. The first message was from a little over 8 months ago. "Hey, you looked incredible today." The next, "I can't stop thinking about that night. You sure he doesn't suspect anything?" And then it was like falling through a hole in the floor. Message after message. Explicit. Graphic. Emotional. "I need to see you again. It's like you're the only thing keeping me sane right now. This baby complicates everything, but I still want you." And then his replies. Colder. Cruder. "Just chill. I'm not looking for a family. Don't catch feelings. You're just fun, Mats. Don't make it weird." The final message, sent the week after Lila's birth, was a block of silence. She texted him 4 more times. He never answered. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. My hands were shaking. I remember looking up and seeing the light through the blinds shift just slightly, like time had passed without my permission. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone across the room. I just felt weightless. Like everything I knew had been gently lifted out of me and replaced with nothing. That night, Madison was asleep on the couch, Lila on her chest. I sat down gently beside her and whispered, "Madison, did you sleep with someone while you were pregnant?" Her eyes snapped open like she had never been asleep. She stared at me, her pupils huge in the low light, then said, "What the hell are you talking about?" "I found your old phone," I said. I wasn't snooping. I was just trying to recover the baby pictures. Her face twisted. Not in guilt. In fury. "You went through my phone?" I can't believe you," she spat. "You're spying on me? While I'm healing? While I'm trying to raise a child?" "I wasn't trying to spy. I just—" "Don't even," she said, standing up fast enough to jostle Lila, who started crying immediately. She handed me the baby without even looking at her. "Here. Since you're so obsessed with control." I held Lila to my chest, trying to calm her, while Madison stormed off to the bedroom. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just blame. Like I was the one who did something wrong. Madison didn't speak to me for the rest of that night. She stayed in the bedroom with the door locked. I didn't try to knock. I just sat in the dim light of the living room, Lila in my arms, rocking her back and forth while she whimpered from the shock of being yanked awake mid-dream. Eventually, she fell asleep against my chest. I didn't. My mind kept spiraling, replaying every moment from the last 8 months. Every skipped dinner, every passive-aggressive comment, every time she said, "I'm just tired," when I reached out to touch her at night. At the time, I believed her. I didn't question it. And now? All those moments felt like clues I ignored. The next morning, Madison emerged like nothing had happened. She didn't look at me. She went straight to the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee, didn't say a word. Her face was stony, unreadable. "You going to say anything?" I asked. She didn't look up. I tried again. "You cheated on me, Madison, while you were carrying our daughter." Now she looked at me, but not with guilt. With something close to disgust. "Do you think I wanted this?" she hissed. "Do you think I planned it?" I blinked. "I think you made a choice." "No," she snapped. "I made dozens of choices every day to stay in this house with someone who doesn't see me. You were so busy reading baby books and painting cribs like some step-forward dad that you didn't notice I was drowning." I said, "I was trying to do everything right. I didn't know you were." "Exactly." She cut me off. "You didn't know." She grabbed her coat, her keys. I asked where she was going. She said, "I need space." Just like that. "Are you taking Lila?" "No," she said flatly. "You're so perfect. Remember? You handle it." And she left. She didn't come home that night. Or the night after. I fed Lila formula, rocked her to sleep, woke up every 2 hours for diaper changes. I paced the hallways with her when she cried. I tried to sing, but my voice kept breaking. I Googled everything: how to sterilize bottles, how long to warm milk, what each cry might mean. I was terrified of doing something wrong, of failing her. But somehow, we made it through the first night. And then the next. Madison would text occasionally, brief, sharp updates like, "I'll come by for more of my things Wednesday. Don't forget the vitamin drops from the pediatrician." There were no apologies. No offers to help. Just instructions. She came and went over the next week, her tone ice cold, her eyes never meeting mine. When I asked her if she planned to stay somewhere else permanently, she said, "I don't know. Depends." "On what?" "If I can breathe around you again." That night, I held Lila on my lap, her tiny fingers wrapping instinctively around mine. And I just lost it. I cried so hard I thought I'd break something in my chest. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what I'd done so wrong. I had tried to be steady, supportive, a partner, a father, and she hated me for it. But Lila? She didn't hate me. She didn't judge. She just needed me. For food, for warmth, for love. And I realized I might not have a wife anymore, but I had a daughter. And that had to be enough. Madison started coming back once or twice a week. Never with a smile, never with softness, always like she was walking into a room she resented just for existing. She didn't ask how Lila was doing. She didn't hold her for more than a few minutes. She didn't even acknowledge the long nights I'd stayed up, rocking her, learning every sound she made. Her first real coup, her first giggle, I'd captured it all on my phone and offered to show Madison. She barely looked. I've seen babies laugh before. James, she muttered, stuffing extra clothes into her overnight bag. It's not a miracle. That one stung. I wanted to yell. To ask her what happened to the woman who used to daydream about nursery colors and family vacations. But I didn't. Because every time I opened my mouth with even a hint of confrontation, she'd shut down or explode. At one point, I said, if you want to co-parent, we need to actually talk. She looked at me with cold eyes and said, you're not the only parent. Stop acting like you're some kind of martyr. You're not special just because you didn't collapse the moment I left. I said nothing. Because deep down, I wasn't special. I was just holding on. Every day was a quiet test I didn't study for. I was doing my best, but I didn't even know what best looked like anymore. The hardest part wasn't the lack of sleep or the endless diapers. It was the silence. The silence after a long night when I'd finally get Lila to sleep and sit alone in the living room, hearing the faint hum of the fridge, wondering how I went from hopeful dad-to-be to a placeholder for a life Madison no longer wanted. I wanted to believe she'd come around. That this was temporary. That postpartum stress was clouding her, making her lash out. I even looked up articles, postpartum anger, identity loss after childbirth. Maybe she was hurting too. Maybe Travis had made her feel something I hadn't, and then abandoned her, and now she didn't know what to do with the shame. That would make sense, right? But she never said sorry. Not once. She never admitted it was a mistake. She never said, I miss us. Or, I wish I'd done things differently. Instead, she criticized everything. You're letting her nap too long. You're not burping her enough. Why is there formula in the trash? I said I wanted to breastfeed longer. It was always my fault, even when I was doing everything. I started keeping a notebook, tracking Lila's sleep, feeding times, doctor visits. Not for court. Just to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. That I was, in fact, doing this. That I wasn't failing her. One night, during one of Madison's drop-ins, Lila was asleep in the bassinet. I offered Madison a seat. She didn't sit. Just stood near the window with her arms crossed. Then she said, you think you're the better parent, don't you? I was so tired. I just looked at her and said, no. I think I'm the one who stayed. That hit her. I saw it in her face, the way her eyes darted, the way her mouth trembled for a split second. But then she shook her head and laughed bitterly. Yeah, well, maybe I should have left sooner. She left 5 minutes later without saying goodbye to her daughter. That night, I held Lila tighter than usual during her bottle. She blinked up at me with those big dark eyes, her hand gripping my thumb. And I whispered, no matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. The house felt too big once Madison stopped coming around regularly. Not that she ever truly stayed after the blow-up, but now it was different. Her things disappeared little by little. One day it was her shoes by the door. Then her favorite mug from the cupboard. Eventually, even the smell of her shampoo was gone from the bathroom. What remained was me and Lila, and the strange, humming silence that filled in the gaps. The nights were brutal in those early weeks. Lila had no interest in sleep schedules or the fact that her father was operating on 3 hours of broken rest a night. I'd rock her for what felt like centuries, pacing the same grooves into the hallway carpet, whispering nonsense about the stars or reciting lines from books I read as a kid just to fill the quiet. There were moments I felt completely unqualified for any of this. The first time she had a fever, I nearly lost it. I called the pediatrician twice in the same hour. I cried in the laundry room when her rash wouldn't clear up no matter what ointment I tried. I had one night where I held her while she wailed, and I honestly thought to myself, how did people do this before Google? But every little success felt like gold. The first time she giggled, a real laugh, not just a spasm, I sat down on the floor and laughed with her until I cried. When she started making eye contact and holding it, that gaze felt like the closest thing to church I'd ever experienced. She was seeing me, recognizing me, choosing me, and that was everything. I fell into a rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Morning bottle by the window where the sunlight hit just right. Midday naps with her tucked into the wrap against my chest. Late night lullabies, some real songs, some nonsense melodies I made up just to keep her soothed. I started writing letters to her, even though she couldn't read. Little things I wanted her to know when she was older. That her dad didn't plan for any of this. That he was scared. That sometimes he still was. But also that he loved her so much it hurt to breathe. Madison became more like a distant concept than a person in those days. She sent occasional texts to check in short, mechanical, transactional. Pickup times. Doctor reminders. Supply lists. There was no emotion in her messages, just schedule. Part of me wanted to be angry, but most of me was just tired. Tired of trying to guess what she was thinking. Tired of hoping she'd wake up one morning and realize what she was throwing away. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped expecting apologies. And slowly, the space she left behind stopped feeling like a wound. It just became part of the floor plan. Every room in the house still had traces of her, photos in the hallway, the wedding gift from her aunt still on the mantle. But none of it hurt the way it used to. Now, they were just details. Background noise to the main melody, which was Lila's breathing as she slept on my chest, or the little grunts she made when she stretched. Those were the sounds that mattered now. By the time Lila turned 3 months old, Madison had become more ghost than person. She showed up occasionally, like a glitch in the system, unexpected, disruptive, gone before I could adjust. Sometimes she'd stop by with a new pack of diapers or a gift she thought Lila might like. But she never stayed long enough to see if it fit, if the baby liked it, if the moment meant anything. She'd stand there awkwardly near the door, glancing at her phone more than at her daughter, as if being in the house she once called home made her skin crawl. I used to ask her if she wanted to hold Lila. I stopped offering after the 3rd time she shrugged and said, she seemed settled, then walked back out to her car. She had perfected the art of detachment. Efficient. Hollow. Like a barista going through the motions of a drink order she hated. Our exchanges were stiff. She'd text when she wanted to schedule something usually vague, non-committal. Might stop by Saturday. Or, can you send me a pic from her doctor visit? There was no warmth. Just logistics. There were moments I wondered if she was angry because she missed Lila, or because Lila didn't miss her. I'd catch myself watching Lila's face when Madison walked in. There was never any sign of recognition. No smile, no outstretched hands. She reacted to her the same way she reacted to new toys, mild curiosity, then indifference. I didn't know if that was sad or just fair. And the strange thing was, I stopped feeling anxious about it. I stopped holding my breath every time the door opened, wondering if this was the day Madison would ask to come back. She never did. And eventually, I stopped expecting it. The rhythm of life with Lila became so absorbing, so demanding, that it left little room for longing. There were bottles to prep, clothes to wash, pediatrician visits to schedule. I memorized the sound of her hungry cry versus her tired one. I learned how to bounce just right to get her to sleep without needing a pacifier. I had a full-blown system for bedtime now: bath, bottle, 2 books, lights down, white noise up. There was something steadying about it, something grounding. In the middle of the chaos Madison left behind, this tiny person was teaching me how to be present. And in the quiet spaces after Lila had gone to sleep, I'd sometimes just sit and breathe. Not because I had answers, but because I didn't need them anymore. The pain of Madison's betrayal still existed. It sat like a shadow in the back of the room, but it didn't talk much anymore. It didn't scream like it used to. It just watched. Quiet. Dormant. Because this house, this life, it belonged to me and Lila now. Madison's name barely came up, even in my thoughts. Not out of spite. Just irrelevance. She had become background noise. A ghost in our story. And Lila? She was the whole page. Life had started to settle into something resembling order. Mornings with oatmeal and bibs, afternoons with bottles and naps, evenings with lullabies and exhausted couch slumps. I wasn't thriving, not really, but I was surviving. And Lila was growing. Fast. Her laugh had turned into a full-body event. Her kicks, once gentle taps, had become little thunderclaps against her playmat. I was starting to see flashes of personality, little quirks that felt like secrets she was sharing only with me. And then, just when I thought I'd closed the chapter on Madison's betrayal, the past slipped back in. It was a Saturday. I was cleaning out the closet in our guest room, trying to make space for more baby stuff. Madison hadn't stayed in that room since before she left, but some of her boxes were still tucked away. I debated skipping it, but part of me wanted to get rid of everything that didn't serve this new life. Near the bottom, I found a small shoebox labeled work receipts. I almost tossed it, but a corner of a photograph was sticking out, and something about it made me pause. It was a picture of Madison and Travis. Not a selfie, not posed. It looked like someone else had taken it, probably one of her coworkers. Madison was in a sundress I remembered vaguely, sitting across from him at a rooftop bar. She was laughing, head tilted back, hand resting casually on his arm. She was pregnant in the picture. At least 4 or 5 months, if I judged the curve of her belly right. There were more photos, little printed Polaroids, like someone had a thing for capturing their secret in vintage aesthetic. A photo of them sitting in a booth with drinks. A blurry picture of him kissing her neck. One of her resting her head on his shoulder, his hand not on her back, but on her stomach. On Lila. I sat down on the edge of the guest bed, photos trembling in my hand. It wasn't just physical. It wasn't just a mistake. This was a relationship. They had dates, weekends, public outings. While I thought she was working late, while I was painting a crib, while I was lying awake wondering how to make her feel loved when she seemed so distant, she had been building something else, something that didn't include me. And Travis, he wasn't some nameless affair. He was in it, at least for a while. The texts I saw months ago hadn't shown this. They were cold, transactional, crude. But these photos told a different story, at least one where Madison had believed it was more. Maybe he'd been stringing her along. Maybe he ended it when the reality of a baby hit him. I don't know. But she had brought him into our life, into her pregnancy. She'd shared our daughter with him, before she was even born. That realization sat in my throat like acid. I didn't tell her I found the photos. I didn't text. I didn't rage. I just sat there in that guest room for a long time, holding proof of a life she lived without me. And when Lila cried from the other room, I wiped my face, tucked the photos into a folder, and went to her. Because she was mine. She was here. Not the plan. Not the life I imagined. But she was real. And we were still standing. I kept the photos in the back of my closet, tucked inside a manila folder, underneath an old winter jacket. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Not because I needed to look at them again, but because some irrational part of me thought they were evidence. Not for court. Not for some dramatic confrontation. But for myself. Proof that I hadn't imagined all of it. I'd spent so long trying to make sense of Madison's distance during the pregnancy. Trying to rationalize her snapping, her avoidance, her refusal to meet my eyes. And now, here was the answer, printed in glossy 4x6. It hadn't been about hormones or stress. It had been about him. She'd found someone who made her feel something different. I don't even know what excitement, attention, danger, escape. Whatever it was, it pulled her far enough away from me that she didn't look back. And even when he left, when he ghosted her after Lila was born, she still never returned. That was the hardest part to accept. She didn't come back. Even when the fantasy collapsed, when reality hit and the guy she gambled everything on walked away, she didn't turn around. She didn't say, "I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Can we rebuild?" She just vanished further. And I think, for a long time, I was waiting for the version of her I used to love to reappear. The Madison who argued about baby names at midnight. The one who pressed my hand to her belly the first time Lila kicked. The woman who once looked at me like I was her anchor. But she was gone. Maybe she'd been gone long before the affair even started. I had to let her go. Not out of bitterness. Not out of spite. But because clinging to the memory of who she used to be was robbing me of the father I needed to become. I started focusing on the little victories. Lila's first solid food. Her ridiculous expression the first time she tasted mashed banana. The way she'd babble nonsense while dragging a toy behind her, utterly confident she was making a point. I'd catch myself laughing out loud, even on the bad days. We had our own routines now. Saturday mornings at the park. Afternoon walks where I'd narrate everything we passed, trees, dogs, clouds, strangers in too tight yoga pants. She'd gurgle in response like she was offering her own commentary. Every time she looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes, something in my chest anchored again. Like gravity pulling me back into the moment. And I realized I didn't need Madison to come back to feel complete. Because maybe what we had wasn't complete to begin with. Maybe it was already crumbling under the weight of who we were pretending to be. But this thing between me and Lila? It was real. Raw. Built from sleepless nights and quiet joy and resilience I never knew I had. Letting go of the fantasy meant finally making space for the reality. And that reality, however imperfect, was something I could believe in. By the time Lila was walking, I had fully settled into our routine. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I'd imagined when I thought about family life years ago. But it was ours. We had our spots. The park with the shady swing set, the coffee shop that didn't mind toddlers with loud cups, the corner of the grocery store where Lila always pointed at the lobster tank with wide-eyed awe. I started recognizing other parents, not names, just faces. Nods of solidarity. Brief chats about sleep regressions and snack hacks. That's how I met Claire. We'd seen each other a few times before, background extras in each other's lives. Her son, Mason, always charged full force into the sandbox like he had something to prove. Lila was more cautious but fascinated by him. One day, Mason was tossing mulch over his shoulder like a dog digging for bones, and Lila stood nearby, completely captivated. I must have muttered something like, "He's committed to the bit," because Claire laughed. Not a polite, forced laugh. A real one. It caught me off guard. I hadn't made a woman laugh in God, I didn't even know how long. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing intense. Just easy stuff, diapers, naps, how every snack somehow ends up in a shoe. She had that same edge of exhaustion I saw in the mirror, but she wore it with grace. Over the next few weeks, we crossed paths more often. Sometimes it was just a wave from across the play structure. Sometimes it turned into shared benches and traded crackers. Claire had a warm way of listening that didn't demand vulnerability, but welcomed it all the same. And I realized I felt lighter around her. Not distracted, not reckless, just calm. One afternoon, after Mason and Lila had worn each other out at the park, Claire and I lingered. She asked if I wanted to grab a coffee while the kids napped in their strollers. It felt like a small, gentle risk. And for once, I didn't say no. That day, we talked more deeply. About co-parenting. About the weird limbo of not being in love but still being tethered to someone. About how hard it was to let go of a dream when there was a child in the middle of it all. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. But when she looked at me and said, "It's okay if you're still angry," something in me exhaled. Because she wasn't asking for a version of me that had it all figured out. She was just sitting beside the one that existed. And that felt like the first real connection I'd had in a long, long time. It wasn't a love story. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a light in the fog. And for someone who'd been stumbling alone for months, that light meant everything. There's something strange about realizing you're healing, not because everything suddenly feels fine, but because you stop bracing for pain. That's how it was with Claire. There wasn't a single moment where I thought, "This is it. This is love again." It was quieter than that. She never filled a void Madison left. She didn't try to. She just existed in my life gently, showing up in small ways, like warmth creeping into a house that had gone cold without anyone noticing. We didn't rush anything. It wasn't even dating, really. Just presence. We swapped off at the park, her watching both kids while I ran for coffee, me returning the favor when she forgot diapers. It started to feel like a shared orbit, not just two planets passing by. There were nights, after Lila had gone down, when I'd think about texting her. Not for anything important. Just to share a dumb photo or a half-finished thought about how my daughter had discovered the concept of peekaboo and now thought she was a magician. And Claire would always respond, not with forced interest, but with sincerity. She remembered things. Asked questions that made me feel human again. And slowly, I started imagining what it might be like, having someone like that in our lives. I didn't bring Claire home. Not at first. I wasn't ready. Lila was still so small, and the echoes of Madison's absence still lingered in our living room, in the photos I hadn't taken down, in the silence that filled bedtime without another voice to read the second story. But I started to realize something. I didn't feel haunted anymore. I felt aware. I felt grounded. And more than anything, I felt protective of the peace we'd built, me and Lila. When Claire finally did come over, nothing dramatic, just a rainy afternoon where she dropped by with soup and Mason, it was normal. The kids played, the grown-ups talked, and it didn't feel like a betrayal of anything. It felt like life moving forward, the way it does when you let it. At one point, Lila toddled into Claire's lap without hesitation. It wasn't a grand moment. Just a tired baby finding a comfortable place to sit. But it made my chest ache in the best way. I still thought about Madison sometimes. Still had questions I'd probably never get answers to. But they didn't hold me hostage anymore. That part of the story was closed. This new chapter? I didn't know how long it would last. I didn't need to. All I knew was that after the storm, after the betrayal, after the nights where I'd sat in the dark holding Lila and wondering how I'd ever feel whole again, there was this. Something soft. Something possible. And maybe, just maybe, something that looked a lot like hope. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more dramatic tales.